School uniforms have existed for almost as long as there have been organised schools, but are they a good thing? Why do we wear them? And what are the pros and cons to having a school uniform? Well, Ticker Ed starts right now.
Ticker Ed, in association with Enquiry Tracker, empowering schools to manage and grow inquiries and online enrolment.
Hello and welcome back to Ticker Ed, where we will be unpacking and examining the way we teach, listen and learn from primary education right through to university and beyond. And whilst Enquiry Tracker is the presenting sponsor of today's program, the opinions expressed in the following segment are of course our own. And joining me now is my regular co-host and co-founder of Enquiry Tracker is Greg Campitelli. And today's topic, school uniforms. Greg, thank you so much for joining me.
It's the hot one, isn't it? It's always the one that's debated in senior school.
Absolutely.
The uniform debate versus the no uniform debate.
100%. And I think growing up, watching cartoons as a kid and seeing all these American cartoons where they're never in uniform and always striving for that. But I thought this was an interesting one and actually had me going back through the records.
Oh, no.
So in 2005, my school changed their 100-year uniform, which was a big historic moment.
Right.
They put on a little show. I was chosen to be part of the catwalk. There it is on screen.
Oh my God.
Buffhead at the front there. So they added, they changed the colours and popped a pinstripe blazer together, and it was a funny time. But they did the whole shebang: catwalk, music. Michael Jackson's music was playing, and the whole thing. It was God, that vest. I did not like that vest. But anyway, it was funny to look back at the uniform, and thanks again for getting me to pull those out.
No surprise you ended up on TV.
Well, I mean, there we go, right? Maybe alluding to things to come.
But I wore a uniform. In primary school, I had the cap.
Yep.
And a tie, of course, and right through secondary school, the blazer, very strict uniform.
Strict uniform.
You absolutely got detentions if you weren't wearing the uniform properly.
100%. We were the same.
Absolutely.
So how I guess, have schools always had uniforms, I suppose? Let's unpack that.
Well, I suppose the history, obviously not too much time today, but Western education has been heavily influenced by the uniform, probably most recently in the 16th century, where in the English tradition, schools for poorer kids started asking them to wear cloaks to keep them warm, really. And that morphed into private education and public schools in England starting to adopt a more uniform approach, which then filtered out across the world to America, Canada, Australia, etc. But interestingly, a couple of quirky ones, the tie. The tie, why do we wear tie? You're wearing a tie today. It's an unusual piece, you look resplendent, of course. Very common in uniforms, but actually came from the French cravat.
Right.
Which in itself was very popular from the Balkan mercenaries who used to wear a necktie to distinguish, good guys and bad guys kind of thing.
Interesting. So the military aspect of it is
curious. The military, and that's big in Japan. So if you look at a lot of the uniforms in Japan, they're really heavily influenced by German naval uniforms of the 19th century. And I know that this is an old favourite for you, Eton, we were talking about before the show, in England, tails and top hat from the 20s, the Roaring
top
20s.
Hat and tails.
Well, mainly tails today. They don't have to wear the top hat anymore, but it's a bit of a laugh, isn't it?
God, you'd be having a champagne for recess, and I don't know, it just feels a bit funny. But uniforms seem to be increasingly being adopted by public schools as well. We're seeing more and more of that. And figures out of the US, a country traditionally public schools don't require uniforms, has shown a jump of 12% to 20% of public schools switching to uniforms. Seems there's been an upswing towards uniforms. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, I think probably the big reasons, and there's lots of reasons, and our guest will unpack some of those today, but the obvious ones is identity. Yeah. You wear a uniform because you want to belong to something. At Enquiry Tracker, we know about brand differentiation and how important it is to have a really good brand about your school. And so uniform helps identify brand, and it can be a good or a minus, because if the kids are wearing it well, it's great. If the kids are wearing it badly, it's not so good. Ease and cost, it's easy. You don't have to have the debate with the children in the morning about what they're going to wear to school today.
And it is a thing.
It is a real thing.
Like would be a debate every morning. What are you going to wear? Jump into the.
Oh my God!
Yeah.
And parents don't need that argument. But probably the big one for me is the equity thing. That everyone who comes into that classroom is wearing the same uniform, regardless of their background, socioeconomic background, wealth status, etc. So it levels the playing field, and hopefully the teachers teach them more equally and don't have those personal biases that start creeping in. And the other final one in terms of the pros for me is academic. There is some studies, not definitive, that show that students in uniform are more attentive for longer periods of time, and teachers can teach more effectively, so the learning increases.
Yeah.
But obviously that's counterbalanced balanced by the negatives,
The other side of the coin, which, this debate is, of course, fascinating, and perhaps that's a good time to bring in our guest for today to give us another perspective.
Absolutely.
Let's welcome Janice Crampton, the Executive Director and CEO of Association of Independent School Admission Professionals in Australia, all the way from Chicago. Janice, thanks for your time.
It's great to be here today. Thanks so much for having me.
Now, you've been sitting there listening diligently to Greg and I prattle on back and forth, but we want to get your insight. But first up, tell us about the Association of Independent School Admission Professionals. What do you guys do day to day?
We are a global association that has one thing in mind, and that one thing is to educate, elevate, empower, and engage those admission and enrollment professionals that work at private and independent parochial schools around the globe. We are looking to this particular organization to be the one that will ensure that this profession has a curriculum, an understanding, a real sense of why do we do what we do and how to be the best at what we do. So again, that is what we wake up every morning and seek to be able to accomplish.
Janice, tell me about, we've unpacked, Mike and I have talked about some of the big pros for why schools should have uniforms in place. Talk to us about your experience, your advice, because I'm sure not all of your member schools have a uniform in place, but talk to us about the pros before we identify the negatives.
So many, in fact, Greg, you're exactly right. Many of our schools do, in fact, put into place a school uniform, a very significant dress code that feels uniform-like. Khakis, a pullover, a button-down, a sweater. There's no mistaking what one is going to get up in the morning and put on. The pro of that, as we've said in earlier conversation, is that in fact does help to promote or clarify the nice connection between an institution's mission and vision, what they say as a school community they will promise to do in that particular educational environment, but also the social and emotional implications of a school uniform and what it says, but also what it may not say to not only the community internally, but to the community externally as they perceive oftentimes either the seriousness of purpose towards education or, for that matter, that statement around we are as a community this and not that, so to speak.
Yeah, it's very interesting when you start to unpack it a little more. What do you see as the main argument against having uniforms, do you think?
There are several, and so certainly in the brief time that we have together today, I might point out a couple. Some of the concerns have to do with a child and their identity or lack of the ability to have individual identity. When you in fact know that everyone is going to wear something similar, have a balance or an evening out of expectation in this particular way, how can one in a mission, let's say, establish a feeling of creativity and the love of learning, when in actuality you're saying, well, you can do that, but within the confines of this particular look and feel. And that has, for many institutions, many schools, been the thing that they look back on and say how one's hair is, how one's jewelry, how one's cloth or school uniform is, or the lack thereof, helps to, in fact, squelch that. And so it really is that lack of individuality.
Janice, one more from me. Do you think that uniforms help shape parental choice in deciding which schools to send their children to or not? Like, hey, if they've got a uniform, I'll send them there, or if they haven't got a uniform, what role do they play in influencing parent choice, really?
I think it makes a statement because it talks about feel and the culture of the community. And again, we are focusing our time right now on the school uniform, but quite honestly, we could take school uniform out and put in something else. for example, recess, right? Or school transportation to and from a school, or what languages you teach. Believe it or not, what a school does and how it appears and how it shapes itself puts together, as I said, a school community or ethos. And that's the impression that is then instilled on a family when they're thinking about what might be the best school for their child.
Incredible. Janice, thank you so much for joining us on the program to unpack this very curious topic. And I think it's more interesting once you start putting a little bit of thought into it. So thank you for your time.
My pleasure. And thank you again for including me in on this really interesting conversation.
And thanks for your time, of course, Janice. And Greg, thank you for your time and, of course, bringing some interesting guests and some interesting topics as always. Let's go through some ticker top tips.
Yes, my top tips for uniform for schools: ensure your students, families and teachers buy in and support the uniform policy. If they're not buying into it, it's not going to work. So make sure they're strong advocates. Now make that policy, whatever it is, readily available and easy to understand. Put it on your website, put it in a staff room, disseminate the policy. And my final one is, don't be afraid of refreshing your uniform. Make it smart, make it contemporary, make it dynamic, and as students, Mike, will wear it.
100%, and hopefully wear it well, because as you said before, the 100-year-old uniform doesn't need to be the case, because we had that khaki, it was very drab, and we had the boater hats as well.
I know, I remember the boater hats,
Yeah.
but you've got it in Inquiry Tracker. We know the importance of uniform and brand, so wear it beautifully, wear it well, make it shine for your school.
I was always quite uniform proud. I tried to be, at least. But Greg, thanks again for your time as always.
Absolute pleasure, Mike.
Easy done. What a great show today there, presented by Inquiry Tracker. And if you'd like to learn more about how your school can use this amazing admissions software, head over to inquirytracker.net. They've got some great stuff on there. I've been your host, Mike Loader, and I'd like to thank you for joining us on the program. I'll see you again soon. Be well.